In June 1977, a resolution was introduced in Congress to mark the first week of May as Asian American Heritage Week, and we celebrate this now as Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month for the entire month of May. Today, many Americans understand the importance of knowing our complete and diverse history, which includes Asian American history. I'm Yoonj Kim, and over the past few weeks, we have been breaking down the significance of these historical events and how they tie into the things that are happening today. I'm in conversation with Lisa Sasaki. She is the interim director of the Smithsonian American Women's History Museum. Lisa, first of all, what is the significance of having an Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month? Why is it so important to honor memory?
Well, it's so important to honor memory because otherwise we often have in our busy lives not enough time to be able to stop and learn about histories and stories that we might not be as familiar with.
And what are some of the personal histories in Asian American communities that you feel passionately about? I know that your family came through the Hawaiian Islands at some point, right?
Yes, so on my father's side, they immigrated over from Japan into Hawaii, where they operated a tofu factory, as well as worked on various different plantations and farms. This is an image of my great-grandmother right here, and her older sister, and her father and younger brother. And this was prior to her leaving Japan.
Do you know much about the Senate resolution that made Hawaii a part of the U.S.?
Let me go back and talk a bit about the Kingdom of Hawaii, which was recognized as an independent sovereign nation. And what ended up happening is the companies who had come to the Hawaiian Islands wanted to be able to have greater authority there. They wanted to be able to, practice the businesses and have the plantations and do business as they pleased. And so what you saw happen was, businessmen who were going in and advocating for the United States to come in and govern a nation that was already being governed.
Right.
And so what we see happen with that Senate resolution is a dissolving of a government, of a kingdom that was in existence prior to that.
Would you say that Hawaii was an American colony at this time?
I would say yes to that. Yeah. You often saw other things happening that become hallmarks of colonization, like the repression of native cultures, customs, even language.
What would you say then is a lasting cultural significance of adding Hawaii as a U.S. state, this area where so much of Asian American history has come through?
What we have to recognize is that Hawaii has been and has always been a very important way station along the way that has had great significance, not only in U.S. history, our military history, our political history, our economic history, but it also has a lot to do with our cultural histories as well. Oftentimes, trends, products, things that people are excited about in Asia would first go to Hawaii before then being brought over to the west coast of the United States and then to the rest of the continental U.S.
Speaking of way stations, Lisa, I'd love to talk about a little bit of the preserved untold stories outside of Hawaii. Tell us about Angel Island Station.
So it's in the San Francisco Bay. You can go and visit and see the immigration station as it currently exists and walk through some of those dormitories. And if you look closely, you can see the poems in Chinese and in Japanese that the occupants had carved into the wall as a testament to their time there. Angel Island is often called the Ellis Island of the West, but I think that's a little bit of a misnomer. It was created to house immigrants as they came over, but in particular, the relationship with the Asian American community is fairly strong. You had many people who were coming over and passing through Angel Island, but you also had a situation where Angel Island became unfortunately, the longer term home for some people. And as a result of that, you had people who were living in dormitories for months, sometimes even years at a time, just sort of in a holding pattern, waiting for approval to come into the United States. I would say that probably the closest parallels that we're seeing are, the detention centers that we see at the borders today.
And it also reminds me of the imprisonment of Japanese Americans during World War II.
During World War II, when there was this national crisis of an enemy, Japanese and Japanese Americans who were living in the United States were suddenly seen as being the enemy. And as American citizens, they should be protected under the law from imprisonment without just cause. And because of what was happening during World War II, the hysteria, the fear, especially after Pearl Harbor, for those who were in power at the time, it seemed to be justifiable to make the decision to quote unquote evacuate the West Coast of Japanese Americans and anybody who was of Japanese descent. And that, incarceration of 120,000 Americans and immigrants without just cause is one of the reasons that we need to be so very careful today and mindful of ensuring that history doesn't repeat itself. The U.S. government acknowledged that what they did was not right. And personally, one of the most touching moments in my memory is my grandmother when she received the apology letter thanks to the Civil Liberties Act that basically said that what occurred was not right. She never wanted to talk about camp at all, but she sat me down as a teenager and showed me the letter, and with tears in her eyes, "This is so important, Lisa, because my government said that they were sorry and that what they did was wrong."
And Lisa, what other things can we learn about AAPI history from personal family objects and other things left behind by our ancestors?
Well, I think first of all, it's so important to recognize that these objects do hold memories and stories. And I think that's one of the wonderful things about the Smithsonian is that we house all of these stories and these objects that come to us. But I also want to remind people that your own family history is something that you can record, that these treasures that are attached to memory from your own family are worth recording and remembering into the future.
For sure. I mean, I'm a first-generation immigrant, so all of my memories, the mementos that I have of my grandparents, they're from back in Korea. And one of my favorite ones, it's a photo of my maternal grandparents on their wedding day in Korea. And I just love it because it reminds me really of how far I have come. Without that reminder, it can be really easy for me to get lost, because I don't think Korean Americans have a museum like the Japanese American community does. Maybe one at the Smithsonian in the near future.
And we're definitely wanting to make sure that Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders do have space on the National Mall so that the stories can be told for any visitor who comes here.
Amazing. I can't wait to see it when it comes out.
You'll definitely get an invitation. You'll be the first there.